Local history of Montgomery, the bus boycott. The interstate's part of the story. And it's part of the story for Montgomery today. It's part of the Montgomery legacy. So when they built the interstate, part of the design is essentially part, one of the things I do with the Montgomery bus boycott, what we do with Air Force officers as part of their professional development is we talk about thinking about this local history as a way to think about strategy, leadership, innovation. And the Montgomery bus boycott is hugely successful, helps launch the civil rights movement for the next 15 to 20 years. It's a pivotal moment. But if we just talk about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., we miss what happens to the community as part of what we sometimes call the counteroffensive. We're going to head up here to Holt Street Baptist Church, where on December 5th, Martin Luther King Jr., who wasn't the pastor of that church, but he's newly elected as the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, which is going to be in charge of the bus boycott. On December 5th, 1955, Martin Luther King Jr. preached the Montgomery bus boycott at this church, Holt Street Baptist. He preached it to thousands of members of the black community who gathered not only inside of the building, but outside of the building as well, where loudspeakers broadcast his sermon to people in the audience. Many of the people in that audience had participated in the bus boycott that day, which was also the day of Rosa Parks' trial, after she'd been arrested the previous Thursday evening for challenging the city's segregation rules on its public transportation. The bus boycott that started on December 5th was formed into a movement that day on December 5th. The foundation of the Montgomery Improvement Association. That afternoon, they elected Martin Luther King Jr., a fairly new pastor at Dexter Avenue Memorial Baptist Church. And that evening, he preached the boycott here. That message that he gave and this movement that began that day helped launch the modern civil rights movement, or relaunch it, revector it, toward the successes that it achieved over the next decade or more. For Air Force officers who are being educated over at Maxwell Air Force Base, just a mile from here. Some of those lessons include things like thinking about distributed control and decentralized execution through a mass movement that's coordinated across many different churches, many different community organizations, and tens of thousands of people. We also want them to think about the conduct of strategy and innovation against a thinking adversary. We also want them to think about the relationship between themselves, their base, and the space around them over in the city. We also want them to think about the effects not only of this movement, but also of the counter movement. As you can tell from the noise around us, nearby is the interstate, 85 and 65. This interchange was built directly over the center of the community that fed Holt Street Baptist. Many homes and businesses were destroyed to build the interstate. The real question in thinking about Holt Street Baptist Church and looking at it today is thinking about how different it is and our inability to see it the way it once was in the context of its community at the time. Zion, AME Zion Church, is where on December 5th in the afternoon, the Montgomery Improvement Association was founded, and they established their strategy for conducting an extended boycott. It eventually runs for 381 total days and achieves its aims, actually more than its aims, of desegregating buses in Montgomery, and helps launch the modern civil rights movement. So that meeting is held here. It's part of an effort at bringing multiple denominations together as a major driver for social organization in the course of the boycott. And just straight down the street is Holt Street Baptist. And it is no coincidence that these two churches here on this street sit right next to the 85-65 interchange, and the neighborhoods that fed these now shuttered churches were largely broken apart and in many cases bulldozed to put in the interstate network. So what's interesting is up here, we're getting into this area that a little bit further east was one of the central black majority neighborhoods in Montgomery, and a lot of leaders of the bus boycott lived in this area along High Street down to Alabama State. So these are some of the few remaining houses in the Centennial Hill neighborhood off of High Street. You can hear the construction work over here. This whole area sweeping down toward downtown has largely been occupied by the state, and it's used to different purposes, parking decks and other things. Here we have the Dexter Parsonage, where Martin Luther King Jr. and his family lived while he was the pastor at Dexter, and several other houses from this neighborhood. January 31st, 1956, the house was bombed. King wasn't home, but his wife and child were. They weren't injured, but it was a scary moment. Almost everything that was bombed, except for one church, didn't suffer serious damage. But most of those places were then more effectively shuttered or destroyed or relocated by the construction of the interstate. So the state's work in a counteroffensive was far more effective than the work of terrorists in mounting a reprisal to the bus boycott. Miss Valda Montgomery grew up in that house down the block there. Her father played an important role in the Montgomery bus boycott in helping to coordinate transportation efforts. When the Freedom Riders were in Montgomery, that's where they stayed before they left town, in the upper floor of that house. So lots of importance to the civil rights movement here on this street, but it's pretty startling to see a few of the original houses, and then across the street, massive construction work taking place. So the landscapes of Montgomery are changing. The question really for us is to be engaged with thinking about how are they changing? Are they changing in purposeful ways? And how can the base be part of an improved Montgomery, an improved future for Montgomery, and do its part to make it a flourishing relationship between the base and its personnel and the community where the base resides.